I've been retired from the Park Service for 20 years now. Most days I sit on this porch looking at the same line of Douglas firs that I've looked at for half a century. They say silence is peaceful. They're wrong. Silence is just a container for the noises you can't forget. There are things I saw in those woods, things I did, or rather things I didn't do that have followed me out and sat with me on this porch every single evening. I'm an old man, and I know I don't have many evenings left. Maybe it's time to empty the container. Maybe it's time to talk about that day in the autumn of '78. It's a story I've never told. Not to my wife, not to my sons, not to the other rangers. Some truths are too heavy to share. They bend you out of shape. You carry them alone, or you break. For 40 years I chose to carry it. But the weight is different now. It's not just heavy anymore. It's sharp. It pokes at me in the quiet hours before dawn. The air that morning had the kind of crispness that makes you feel alive. The leaves were turning, a riot of gold and red against the deep green of the pines. I was doing a routine patrol up on the Black Ridge Trail, an area that wasn't popular with hikers. It was too remote, too rugged. That's why I liked it. You could walk for 10 miles and the only sounds would be your own boots on the trail and the wind whispering through the canopy. I remember the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, a sweet woody perfume. The sunlight was coming down in shafts like pillars holding up the sky. It was beautiful, but something was off. I felt it before I heard it. It was a change in the atmosphere, a sudden oppressive stillness. The birds went quiet. The squirrels stopped chattering. The whole forest just held its breath. I've spent my life in the woods. I know its rhythms. I know the sound of a bear crashing through the undergrowth, the scream of a cougar, the snap of a twig under a deer's hoof. This was none of those. This was a silence so profound, it was a sound in itself. I stopped, resting my hand on the handle of the small axe on my belt, more out of habit than anything else. I scanned the trees, my eyes trying to cut through the deep shadows. That's when I heard it. It was a low, guttural sound, more of a vibration than a noise. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a deep thrumming that I felt in my chest cavity. It wasn't an animal sound, it was too deliberate, too resonant. It was like the lowest note on a massive pipe organ being played deep within the earth. The sound lasted for maybe 10 seconds and then faded, leaving the silence even heavier than before. I stood there for a long time, frozen. Every instinct, honed by decades in the wilderness, was screaming at me. It was a primal feeling, a message from a part of my brain that civilization had forgotten about. It said one thing over and over: you are not the hunter here. You are being watched. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me far more than the autumn air, that whatever made that sound was aware of me. It knew exactly where I was, and it was waiting. I backed away, one step at a time, trying to make my boots whisper on the packed earth and fallen pine needles. Every part of my training told me to identify the source, to assess the situation, but that was training for things I understood, for bears and mountain lions and lost hikers. This was something else. This was an old, deep woods fear, the kind that stories are whispered about around a campfire, the kind you dismiss in the daylight. My father, who took me hunting in these same mountains when I was a boy, always said, "The woods have rules older than we are." He wasn't a superstitious man, but he respected the unknown. He taught me that arrogance is the deadliest thing you can carry into the forest. And in that moment, all I felt was a profound sense of my own smallness, my own fragility. I was just a man with a small axe and a radio that suddenly felt like a child's toy. I kept moving backward, my eyes scanning the dense wall of trees in front of me. I didn't dare turn my back. The feeling of being watched was a physical pressure, like the air had grown thick and heavy around me. It was in the way the shadows seemed to cling to the tree trunks, deeper and darker than they should have been. It was in the absolute unnatural stillness of the foliage. Not a leaf stirred. Then the smell hit me. It rolled in on a breeze that I couldn't feel, a thick, musky odor that caught in the back of my throat. It was a rank animal smell, but not like any animal I knew. It wasn't the scent of a wet bear or a rotting carcass. It was pungent and almost coppery, like old blood and damp fur and something else, something vaguely like rotting onions. It was the smell of something massive, something that didn't belong. The scent was so overpowering it made my eyes water. That was it. That was the final signal that broke through my professional composure. My hand tightened on the strap of my pack and I finally turned, not to run but to walk away, quickly and deliberately. Running is a mistake. Running makes you prey. You never run unless you know for certain what you're running from and that you can outlast it. I was certain of neither. I walked for what felt like an hour, though my watch later told me it was only 15 minutes. I didn't look back, but I felt those unseen eyes on me for every single step. The pressure was relentless. I focused on the trail, on my breathing, on the simple mechanics of putting one foot in front of the other. I tried to think about my wife, about the dinner she'd have waiting, but the fear was a fog, clouding everything but the immediate need to put distance between myself and that spot. After about a mile, I allowed myself to stop behind a thicket of ancient rhododendrons. I crouched down, pulling out my canteen with a shaking hand. The silence of the forest had returned to something more normal. I could hear a distant woodpecker, the rustle of a chipmunk in the leaves. The oppressive weight was gone. I thought for a fleeting, hopeful second that I had imagined it all, that it was a trick of the wind and shadows. But then I looked down at the trail. Crossing it, pressed deep into the damp soil, was a single footprint. It was enormous, easily twice the size of my own boot and wide, impossibly wide. It was shaped like a human foot, but grotesquely oversized. The toes long and thick, the arch almost flat. It hadn't been there when I walked up the trail earlier that morning. I knew that with absolute certainty. I stared at it, and the cold dread that had been simmering in my gut turned to ice. Whatever it was, it had crossed the trail right behind me. It had been following me, and I realized the chase wasn't over. It had only just let me think it was. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, quiet woods. I had spent a lifetime learning to read the forest, to understand its language of snapped twigs and rustling leaves. But this was a word I had never learned, a sentence written in a language I didn't want to understand. The footprint was a declaration. It said, "I was here. I could have taken you. I chose not to." I straightened up slowly, my joints cracking in protest. My gaze swept the surrounding trees, searching for any flicker of movement, any shape that was out of place. But there was nothing. Only the ancient, indifferent columns of pine and fir, their branches laced together against the pale autumn sky. The feeling of being watched had vanished, but it had been replaced by something worse. The certain knowledge that I had been spared. It wasn't an escape, it was a release. Like a fisherman tossing a small fish back into the water. I took out my radio, my fingers fumbling with the cold metal dial. I should report it. That was the protocol. Unusual signs, potential danger to the public. But what would I say? "Dispatch, this is Ranger Thomas. I found a very large footprint." They would ask for a cast. They would ask for measurements, for any other signs. They would send a team up. And what would they find? A story from an old ranger who'd spent too much time alone in the woods. They'd call it a bear track, distorted by the mud. They'd pat me on the back and tell me to take a few days off. My father's words echoed in my mind again. The woods have rules older than we are. Some things aren't meant to be put on a report. Some things aren't meant to be cataloged and filed away. They belong to the shadows, to the deep places of the world that we only borrow. To report this felt like a violation, like telling a secret that wasn't mine to tell. It felt dangerous. So I put the radio away. I slung my pack over my shoulder, the familiar weight doing little to comfort me. I took one last look at the footprint, memorizing its impossible shape, the depth of it, the sheer power it implied. Then I turned and continued down the trail, my pace steady but my mind racing. The rest of the patrol was a blur. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking form. Every gust of wind sounded like a low growl. The familiar woods had become an alien landscape, a place where I was no longer at the top of the food chain. I was an intruder, and I had been warned. When I got back to my truck at the trailhead, the sun was beginning to dip below the ridge, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a beautiful sunset, the kind I had admired thousands of times before. But that evening, I saw no beauty in it. I only saw the fading light and the long, deep shadows that were stretching out from the tree line reaching for me. I threw my pack in the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. I never went up to Black Ridge again, not in the 30 years I had left with the service. Other rangers patrolled it. They never reported anything unusual. Sometimes a younger ranger would come back and talk about a strange feeling they got up there, a sense of being watched. I would just nod and pour them a cup of coffee. I never told them why. I let them think it was just the loneliness of the high country playing tricks on their minds. It was a lie, but it felt like a necessary one, a kinder one. That night, I went home to my wife, Sarah. She knew something was wrong the moment I walked in the door. I was pale. My hands were still shaking slightly. She asked me what had happened, her face etched with concern. I opened my mouth to tell her, to share the crushing weight of what I had seen, what I had felt, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain a fear so ancient? How could I describe the smell of something that shouldn't exist? The sound that shook my very bones? The sight of a footprint that defied all logic? I told her I'd had a close call with a mother bear. It was a simple, believable lie. She accepted it, relieved. She made me dinner, and we sat at our small kitchen table, the silence broken only by the clinking of our forks. But I wasn't really there. I was back on that trail, staring at that impossible print in the ground, feeling those unseen eyes on my back. The encounter had left its own footprint, pressed deep into my soul, and I knew, even then, that it would never fade. It had changed me. It had taken a piece of my courage, a piece of my certainty about the world, and left an empty, cold space in its place, a space that has been there ever since. For years after that day, I lived a half-life. On the surface, everything was the same. I was Thomas, the dependable park ranger. I was a husband to Sarah, a father to my sons when they'd visit. I fixed the leaky faucet, I mowed the lawn, I read the newspaper. But the man doing those things was a shell. The real me was still standing on that ridge, staring at a footprint that shouldn't exist, my skin crawling with the memory of being watched. Sleep became a stranger. For the first few months, I'd jerk awake in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, drenched in a cold sweat. Sarah would stir beside me, murmuring my name, asking if I was okay. I'd tell her it was just a bad dream, a nightmare about the bear. Another lie layered on top of the first. Each one felt like adding another stone to the pack I was carrying. Soon, the weight was immense. The woods were no longer my sanctuary. They were a place of constant low-grade anxiety. I still did my job, but the joy was gone. Every shadow was a potential hiding place. Every snapped twig made me flinch. I found myself talking more on the radio just to hear another human voice, to break the oppressive silence that now felt charged with menace. I stopped taking the remote trails altogether. I stuck to the well-worn paths, the places where the noise of hikers and families kept the deep old quiet at bay. I remember one afternoon, maybe a year after the incident, a young ranger, a new transfer named Frank, was looking over the patrol maps in the station. He was full of that bright-eyed enthusiasm I remembered having once. He pointed a finger at the map. "Black Ridge," he said. "Nobody's requested that route in a while. I'll take it tomorrow, see what's up there." My blood ran cold. I looked at him, at his eager, unsuspecting face, and I felt a paternal wave of dread. I couldn't tell him the truth. They would have sent me for a psychological evaluation, so I did the only thing I could. I lied again. "I wouldn't," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Windfall up there is terrible. Half the trail is probably blocked by fallen trees, and I heard reports of a cougar den near the summit. It's not worth the paperwork." Frank looked disappointed but nodded. "Right. Thanks for the heads up, Thomas." He chose another route. He went out the next day and came back with a story about seeing a family of deer. He was safe, and I had protected him. But I had also pulled him into my lie, making the secret a little bigger, a little heavier. As I watched him leave, I thought of my father. I could almost hear his voice, quiet and firm, reminding me that the woods have rules older than we are. I was beginning to understand that one of those rules was that you don't invite others into its deepest, darkest secrets. You carry them alone. That burden shaped the rest of my career. I became the old, cautious ranger, the one who always double-checked the weather, who packed extra supplies, who warned the younger guys against being cowboys. They respected me for my experience, never knowing it was born not of wisdom but of a single paralyzing moment of absolute terror. I was a fraud, an expert on a world I was now secretly afraid of. The lie to Sarah was the hardest part. Our marriage was built on honesty. We'd been together since we were 19. She could read me like a book, and she knew a chapter was missing. I could see it in her eyes when she looked at me sometimes, a quiet, questioning sadness. She saw the new lines on my face, the way I'd stare out the window into the dark woods behind our house, the way I flinched at the hoot of an owl. She knew the bear story wasn't the whole story, but she loved me enough not to push. Her silence was a gift, but it was also a wall between us. The thing from the woods hadn't just taken my peace, it had taken a piece of my marriage too. I retired at 62. I couldn't bear the thought of staying, of walking those trails as a man whose body was failing, whose reflexes were slowing. The fear had been manageable when I was strong and fast. As an older man, it was a predator I knew I couldn't outrun. So I hung up my hat and settled onto this porch. I thought maybe distance, maybe time, would sand down the sharp edges of the memory. I was wrong. It's still there, as clear as it was that autumn morning in '78. The silence, the sound, the smell, the footprint. It's a ghost that doesn't haunt the woods. It haunts me. For years after that day, I lived a half-life. On the surface, everything was the same. I was Thomas, the dependable park ranger. I was a husband to Sarah, a father to my sons when they'd visit. I fixed the leaky faucet, I mowed the lawn, I read the newspaper. But the man doing those things was a shell. The real me was still standing on that ridge, staring at a footprint that shouldn't exist, my skin crawling with the memory of being watched. Sarah passed away 7 years ago. The silence on this porch got a whole lot louder after that. Sometimes I find myself talking to her, telling her about the birds at the feeder or the way the frost settles on the pines. But I've never told her about Black Ridge. Even now, with just her memory for company, the secret feels too heavy to speak out loud. It's a cold, hard stone I've carried in my gut for over 40 years, and I guess a part of me believes that if I ever set it down, I'll fall apart completely. Most evenings are the same. I watch the sun bleed out behind the mountains, and I wait for the memories to creep in with the shadows. But last night was different. I was sitting here nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee when the local news came on the small television I keep in the living room, its screen visible through the window. I usually ignore it. It's all politics and fender benders. But then a picture flashed on the screen that made the coffee cup tremble in my hand. It was a photo of Black Ridge, the trailhead unmistakable. A young man was missing. A college kid from out of state. An experienced hiker named Ethan, they said. He'd told his friends he was going to hike the Black Ridge Trail. He was supposed to be back 2 days ago. His car was still in the parking lot, right where I'd left my truck all those years ago. A search party was being organized. They showed volunteers in bright orange vests gathering at the base of the trail, their faces a mixture of hope and grim determination. I felt the blood drain from my face. The cold stone in my gut twisted. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a living, breathing thing that had reached out from 1978 and grabbed hold of the present. All those years I had told myself my silence was a form of protection. I was protecting the other rangers, protecting the public from a truth they couldn't handle, a truth that would cause a panic they couldn't contain. I was protecting the woods themselves, maybe, from the chaos of men. But watching the young man's smiling photograph on the screen, I saw my silence for what it really was. Cowardice. I hadn't protected anyone. I had protected myself. I had protected my own sanity, my own comfortable reality, at the expense of the truth. I thought of Frank, the young ranger I'd warned off with a lie about a cougar. At the time, I'd felt a grim satisfaction, a sense of duty done. Now, it just felt like another layer of deceit. What if someone had warned this boy, Ethan? What if I had made that report 40 years ago? The news anchor's voice droned on about the difficult terrain, the dropping temperatures. They interviewed the county sheriff, a man young enough to be my grandson, who spoke with confidence about their search grids and thermal cameras. He said they were confident they would find him. I knew better. You don't find what the woods decides to keep. My father's old words came back to me not as a piece of wisdom but as a curse. The woods have rules older than we are, and I had broken the first one. I had witnessed something and failed to bear witness. I turned off the television, but I couldn't turn off the images in my head. The massive footprint, the coppery, foul stench, the oppressive, absolute silence, the feeling of being prey. Was that what this boy felt in his last moments? Did he hear that low, earth-shaking thrum? Did he have time to be afraid? The questions were a physical torment, each one a fresh stab of guilt. I sat on this porch long into the night, the cold seeping into my old bones. The forest across the yard was no longer just a collection of trees. It was a dark, watching presence. I felt its weight, its judgment. For the first time in 40 years, the fear was not for myself. It was for that boy, and for anyone else who might ever walk that trail, ignorant of what waited in the deep shadows. I had a choice to make. I could remain here, a silent old man on his porch, and let my secret die with me. Or I could pick up the phone, call the sheriff's office, and destroy what was left of my quiet life by telling them a story no sane person would ever believe. The sun rose, but it brought no warmth. Dawn just painted the edges of my fear in shades of gray and pale pink. I hadn't slept. I had just sat, watching the trees across the yard take shape, my joints stiffening until I felt as brittle as a fallen leaf. The choice I'd made in the dark felt different in the light of day. It felt insane. But the image of that boy, Ethan, his hopeful smile on the television screen was burned into my mind. It was a debt I had to pay. My hand shook as I reached for the telephone on the small table beside my armchair. It was an old phone, with a coiled cord that had yellowed with age. Just like me, I had to dial the number for the sheriff's department 3 times before my trembling fingers could complete the sequence. A young woman's voice, crisp and efficient, answered on the second ring. "County Sheriff, how can I help you?" My own voice came out as a dry croak. I cleared my throat. "My name is Thomas," I began. I was a ranger in the national park for over 30 years. I'm calling about the missing boy, on Black Ridge. "Yes, sir. Ethan. Are you a volunteer for the search party?" she asked, her tone polite but routine. She was handling a standard call. She had no idea she was talking to a ghost. "No," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "No, I'm not. You have to call them off. The search party. They can't be up there." There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard in the background. "Sir, the search is being coordinated by Sheriff Douglas. They're professionals. They know what they're doing." "No, they don't," I insisted, the urgency making my words tumble out. "They think they're looking for a lost hiker. They're looking in the wrong way. They're making too much noise. They're ringing a dinner bell." The words sounded foolish as soon as I said them, but they were the truest thing I'd said in 40 years. Another pause, longer this time. "Sir, what is your location?" Her voice had changed. It was now the careful, placating tone you use for someone who might be confused or unwell. "I'm not crazy," I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "I know that trail better than any man alive. I worked it for decades. There are things up there. You need to listen to me. Let me talk to the sheriff." I expected her to hang up or transfer me to a crisis hotline, but after a moment of muffled conversation, a new voice came on the line. Deeper, calmer, and laced with the weary patience of a man who has heard everything. "This is Sheriff Douglas. I understand you have some information about the search on Black Ridge." I took a deep breath, trying to organize the chaos in my mind. "Sheriff, my name is Thomas. I was senior ranger in that park until I retired. I know you've got a search going for that boy, Ethan." "That's right, Thomas. We've got 50 men up there right now, plus canine units. You've got to pull them back," I said, my voice low and earnest. "Especially as it gets dark. You have to get them off that ridge before nightfall." "I appreciate the concern, son," he said, and the word son made me feel 100 years old. "But we can't stop. Every hour counts." "You don't understand," I pleaded, the desperation raw in my throat. "This isn't about him being lost or hurt. This is about what's up there with him. I saw it back in '78. I was on patrol, same trail, same time of year." "Saw what, Thomas?" the sheriff asked, and I could hear the skepticism hardening his voice like concrete. I closed my eyes, the memory flooding back. The smell of wet earth and something else, something foul and coppery, the impossible size of the footprint in the mud, the absolute bone-deep certainty that I was being hunted. I can't say over the phone. It's not something you can just say, but it leaves tracks. And it's not a bear. It's not a cougar. It's old. You need to tell your men to look for things that don't make sense, for silence when there should be noise, for a smell like old, spoiled meat. Tell them if they feel like they're being watched, it's because they are. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. It was the silence of a man making a judgment. "Thomas," Sheriff Douglas finally said, his voice now gentle, the way you speak to a child or an old fool. "I appreciate your call. I really do. We'll keep our eyes open. You get some rest now, you hear?" The click of the line going dead was louder than a gunshot in the quiet room. He hadn't believed a word. He thought I was a senile old man, lost in memories. The stone in my gut, the one I'd carried for 4 decades, felt heavier than ever. I had tried to set it down, but no one would take it. They just patted my head and told me to rest. I looked out the window at the dark line of the mountains in the distance. If they wouldn't listen to my words, they would have to listen to my actions. I couldn't let another life be lost to my silence. I started to slowly push myself up from my chair, my bones groaning in protest. It was a long drive to Black Ridge. My old service jacket hung on a hook by the door. It was the same dark green wool I'd worn for 30 years, the fabric softened with age and smelling faintly of wood smoke and rain. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it on. The joints in my shoulders protested, a sharp grinding pain that reminded me I wasn't the man who'd once walked these ridges from sunup to sundown. I found my heaviest flashlight in the kitchen drawer, the big metal kind that could double as a club. Its beam cut a perfect bright circle on the floor. It felt solid in my hand, a small comfort against the formless dread that was creeping back into me. The drive was quiet. My truck is an old machine, and its groans and rattles were the only sounds for miles. I didn't turn on the radio. I passed the small town where my sons had gone to school, the diner where my wife Sarah and I used to get coffee on Sunday mornings. Each landmark was a ghost, a reminder of a life lived outside the shadow of the mountain. But the closer I got, the bigger that shadow loomed, until it filled the entire windshield. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth began to seep through the truck's vents, and my knuckles went white on the steering wheel. My father, who was a ranger before me, always used to say, "Some things in these woods don't want to be found, and some things don't want you to find them." I'd thought it was just an old woodsman's saying. I learned in '78 that he was being literal. I reached the turnoff for Black Ridge just as the sun was beginning to dip below the peaks, painting the sky in angry streaks of orange and purple. The entrance was blocked by a sheriff's department vehicle. A command post had been set up in the main parking lot. A collection of SUVs, a large RV, and a scattering of men in bright orange vests. Their voices carried on the crisp evening air, sharp and confident. They were professionals doing their job, but they were looking for a lost boy. They weren't looking for what was looking for him. I parked my truck a little ways down the road and walked up, my old boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. A young deputy, no older than my grandson, stopped me before I got within 50 feet of the command post. His hand rested near his sidearm, a gesture that was probably automatic but felt personal. "Can I help you, sir? This area is closed to the public." "My name is Thomas," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "I called Sheriff Douglas earlier. I was a ranger here for 38 years. I need to talk to him." The deputy's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, followed immediately by pity. "Oh, you're Thomas. The sheriff mentioned you might show up. He said to thank you for your concern, but we have it under control. For your own safety, you need to head on home." "He's not listening," I said, my voice rising with an urgency I couldn't control. "You're all searching the wrong places. You're making too much noise. You're ringing a dinner bell." The deputy took a half step back. "Sir, please calm down. We're using trained dogs and grid search patterns. We know what we're doing." I looked past him at the men studying maps laid out on the hood of a truck. They were all focused on the marked trails, the places where a hiker would logically get lost. Their flashlights were beginning to cut beams into the growing twilight, sweeping across the lower slopes. But my eyes were drawn higher up, to a dark crease in the side of the mountain, a place where the trees grew thicker and older. It was an old game trail, one that had been washed off the park maps decades ago. It was the trail I had been on. They would never find it, and they would never find the boy by staying down here. The sheriff had dismissed me. His deputy saw me as a confused old man. I was invisible to them, and maybe that was for the best. "You're right," I said, letting my shoulders slump. I made myself look defeated, tired. "I'm sorry to bother you. It's just an old man's worry." The deputy softened instantly. "I understand, sir. We'll find him. Now you have a safe drive home, okay?" I nodded and turned away, walking slowly back toward my truck. I didn't look back. I waited until the sound of my footsteps was masked by the rumble of a generator starting up at their camp. Then, instead of getting in my truck, I slipped off the gravel shoulder and into the tree line. The darkness under the canopy was immediate and absolute. The air grew cold. All the sounds of the search party faded behind me, replaced by the profound, listening silence of the woods. I was alone now. Just me, the mountain, and the 40-year-old memory that was waiting for me up on the ridge. The woods have their own rules of light and sound. On the road, the sheriff's command post was a bubble of noise and artificial daylight. But the moment I stepped between the first two ponderosa pines, it was like closing a heavy door behind me. The world vanished. The air was instantly 10 degrees colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. My old lungs burned with the first deep breath of it. I didn't need a flashlight. My eyes, even at this age, are better adjusted to the dark than to the bright glare of modern life. Besides, a light is a beacon. It announces your presence to everything, and I had no intention of announcing myself. I moved slowly, my hand trailing along the rough bark of the trees, letting my feet remember the path. This wasn't a trail anymore. It was just a suggestion of one, a faint depression in the forest floor that only someone who'd walked it 1,000 times would ever notice. My old mentor, a ranger named Herbert who had worked this park since before it was a park, used to have a saying. He'd look up at the canopy, his face weathered like an old stump, and say, "The woods don't keep secrets, Thomas. They just wait for the right person to tell them to." I never fully understood what he meant until that day in '78. Now his words echoed in my head with every careful step I took. I was the right person and the woods were about to tell their secret all over again. I climbed for what felt like an hour, my pace steady. My knees ached, a dull throb that was as familiar as my own heartbeat. But the pain was a good anchor. It kept me in the present, kept my mind from running away with the memories that were clawing at the edges of my thoughts. The sounds of the search party were long gone, swallowed by the sheer density of the forest. All I could hear was the rustle of my own jacket and the soft thud of my boots on pine needles. Then I smelled it. It wasn't the smell of a bear or a deer. It was a thick, musky odor, like wet fur and something vaguely rotten, but also something else, something almost human. It was the smell of a predator, an apex one, a smell that bypasses your nose and goes straight to the oldest part of your brain, the part that screams, "Run." The scent was faint, carried on the breeze that sifted down from the ridge. It was the same smell from 40 years ago. My steps faltered. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of old bones. I forced myself to keep moving, pushing through a thicket of ferns that soaked the bottom of my pants with cold dew. The smell grew stronger here. I crouched down, my hand sweeping across the ground. My fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. I pulled out a small dim penlight, cupping my hand around it to shield the beam. It was a bone, a deer's femur by the look of it, but it was snapped clean in two, a spiral fracture that no wolf or mountain lion could make. It would take an incredible amount of force, a twisting motion, to break a bone like that. I'd seen it only once before. I switched off the light and dropped the bone, wiping my hand on my pants as if to clean off the memory itself. I was on the right path. The sheriff's men with their dogs and their maps were miles away, chasing echoes. They were looking for a lost child. I was following the thing that had found him. The air grew still, the wind died down, and the silence that fell was different. It wasn't empty. It was a listening silence. I felt a pressure in my ears the way you do before a storm. I was being watched. I didn't look around. I didn't call out. I just stood there, a 78-year-old man in a forest that was suddenly terribly alive. I looked up the steep incline ahead of me, towards the dark line of the ridge. It was up there. It was waiting, just like it had waited 40 years ago. And this time I knew I couldn't just turn around and walk away. The weight I carried on my porch wasn't just regret. It was a debt, and the woods were finally calling for it to be paid. The higher I climbed, the more the forest changed. The tall ponderosas gave way to gnarled, wind-beaten firs that clung to the rocky slope. The ground became a treacherous mix of loose shale and slick, moss-covered stone. Each step was a calculation. A slip here wouldn't just mean a broken bone. It would mean tumbling into a darkness from which no one would ever find me. The cold was a physical thing now, a weight on my chest, and the air was so thin it scraped my throat raw. I had to stop, leaning against a granite outcrop that felt as cold as a tombstone. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I wasn't a young ranger anymore. I was just an old man chasing a ghost on a mountain that didn't want him. For a moment, doubt washed over me, cold and sickening. What was I even doing? I should be at home, in my chair with a blanket over my knees. This was a fool's errand, a death wish born from 40 years of guilt. But then I remembered the boy's face from the picture on the news. I remembered the look in his mother's eyes. And I remembered the promise I made to myself that day in '78, a silent vow made as I walked away, leaving that other secret buried on this same ridge. I pushed myself off the rock. The debt had to be paid. The ridge was close now. I could feel the wind picking up, a low moan through the stunted trees. The smell was stronger here too, so thick it was almost a taste in the back of my mouth. It was the smell of something ancient and wild, something that owned this mountain. I moved from tree to tree using the shadows as my cover. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague prickle on my neck. It was a certainty. It felt like a physical pressure, as if the darkness itself had eyes. I knew where I was going. There was a small cave, barely a fissure in the rock face, hidden behind a curtain of ancient junipers. It wasn't on any park map. I'd only found it by accident decades ago, and it had been my secret place, a spot to sit and eat my lunch in absolute solitude. Until that day. I crawled the last 50 feet on my hands and knees, the sharp edges of the shale digging into my palms. My breath came in ragged, silent clouds. I peered through the branches of a juniper. There it was, the cave, a black slash against the gray rock, looking exactly as it had 40 years ago. My stomach twisted into a knot of pure, cold dread. Something was lying on the ground just in front of the entrance. It was small and blue. My mind refused to process it at first. It was just a shape, a patch of color that didn't belong. Slowly, carefully, I raised my small pen light, my thumb shaking over the button. I shielded the beam with my hand, letting only a sliver of light escape. It was a sneaker, a child's sneaker, with a cartoon character on the side. It was lying on its side, one lace untied, as if it had simply fallen off a small foot. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying out. They were here. The boy was here, or what was left of him. I clicked off the light, plunging myself back into darkness. My eyes were fixed on the black maw of the cave. I was frozen, trapped between the need to run and the weight of my promise. This was the end of the line. Everything I had carried for 40 years was inside that darkness. And then, a sound came from within the cave. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a roar. It was a soft, guttural noise, a series of clicks and a low, mournful coo. It sounded almost inquisitive, questioning, and woven within that alien sound was something else, something that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was a whimper, a faint, terrified human whimper. The boy was alive. He was in there. With it, my mind reeled. It wasn't a mindless killer. It hadn't, not yet. What was it doing? For 40 years I had believed it to be a monster, a violent force of nature. But this was something else entirely, something far more complex and terrifying. I knew in that instant that I couldn't leave. I couldn't call the sheriff. By the time they got here, it would be too late. It was just me, an old man with a failing body and a 40-year-old secret, standing at the door of a nightmare. I took a slow, deep breath, the icy air burning my lungs one last time. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I had to do something. I pushed aside the juniper branch and took a step into the clearing in front of the cave. The listening silence was broken. The game was over. The snap of the juniper twig under my boot sounded like a gunshot in the dead air. From inside the cave, the strange, soft sound stopped instantly. Everything stopped. The wind, the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth, even the frantic beating of my own heart seemed to pause. I was exposed. A frail old man in a clearing, staring into a wound in the side of the mountain. A shadow shifted within the deeper shadow of the cave. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like a curtain of night being drawn aside. Then, it began to emerge. My breath hitched in my throat. I had spent 40 years trying to imagine it, building it up in my mind from a broken branch, an unnaturally large footprint, a fleeting glimpse of something dark moving between the trees. My imagination had not done it justice. It was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and broad with shoulders that seemed to strain the very dimensions of the cave's entrance. The last of the evening light was dying, but it caught the coarse, dark hair that covered its body, a mix of black and gray and deep, earthy brown. It moved with a silent, fluid grace that defied its bulk. It wasn't an animal walking on two legs. It was something built for it, something that had been walking this earth long before men built trails. The smell hit me again, stronger now. A primal scent of damp earth, wet fur, and something else. Something ancient and unknowable. It took a single step out of the cave and into the clearing, and I saw its eyes. They weren't the simple black beads of a bear. They were deep-set, recessed under a heavy brow, and they glowed with a faint amber intelligence. They were old eyes. They looked at me not with mindless aggression, but with a weary, profound curiosity. And something else. A warning. Then it shifted its weight, a movement so subtle I almost missed it, and I saw him. The boy. He was huddled behind the creature's massive leg, clutching a fold of its matted hair. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it was a physical thing. He was wearing a thin jacket and jeans, and on one foot he had a single white sock. The other foot, bare, was tucked underneath him. He saw me, and a fresh wave of fear washed over his face. He wasn't a captive in the way I'd imagined. He was being sheltered. My entire world, the entire 40-year-old story I had told myself, crumbled into dust. The secret I had carried wasn't that I had failed to hunt down a killer. It was that I had failed to understand. This creature hadn't taken the boy to harm him. It had found him. Maybe he was lost, hurt, and this being, this thing that legends were made of, had brought him here. The soft cooing and clicks I'd heard. It wasn't the sound of a predator with its prey. It was something else entirely. I stood frozen, my mind racing. The sheriff, the search parties, their dogs and their guns. They would see only a monster. They would see a beast and a victim, and they would act accordingly. They would destroy this creature, and in the chaos, the boy could be hurt. I was the only person on this mountain who knew the truth, and I had only known it for 30 seconds. I slowly, deliberately, raised my hands, keeping them open and away from my body, a universal sign of peace. I hoped. "It's okay, son," I said, my voice a dry rasp, barely a whisper. I wasn't speaking to the creature. I was speaking to the boy. "I'm not going to hurt you." The great head tilted, the amber eyes narrowed slightly, studying me. A low sound rumbled in its chest, not a growl, but a deep vibration, like distant thunder. It was a question. It was a statement. It was telling me that this small, terrified child was under its protection. It placed a hand, a massive, leathery hand with thick, dark fingers, gently on the boy's shoulder. The gesture was so tender, so impossibly gentle, that it broke something inside me. What had I been guarding all these years? A lie. A simple, terrifying lie I told myself so I could sleep at night. The truth was infinitely more complex and 1,000 times more dangerous. I had to get him out of there. I had to do it without spooking the boy and without provoking this ancient guardian. My mind, clouded by age and regret, sharpened with the focus of a lifetime spent in these woods. I was a ranger again. This was my park. This was my responsibility. "My name is Arthur," I said, taking a half step forward. My knee protested with a sharp ache, but I ignored it. "What's your name, son?" The boy just stared, his knuckles white where he gripped the creature's fur. He was too scared to speak. The creature let out another low rumble. It shifted its weight again, moving to block my view of the boy more completely. It was a clear message. Stay back. I knew I was running out of time. The night was falling completely, and with it, the cold. The boy couldn't stay here. I looked past the creature at the boy's terrified face, and I made a decision. I lowered one hand slowly, my eyes never leaving the creature's. I pointed at my own chest. "Arthur," I repeated softly. Then, I pointed towards the boy. It was the most basic communication I could think of. "I'm one of you. He's one of you. Let him come with me." The creature watched my hand, its expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind finally picking up again, whispering through the pines like a long-held secret. Then, it let out a soft, guttural click. It looked down at the boy, then back at me. Its gaze held a weight of ages, a deep, sorrowful intelligence that I would never comprehend. It was judging me, weighing the threat I posed against the hope I might offer. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my life and the boy's depended entirely on what it decided. The creature did not move. It simply held my gaze, and in those deep amber eyes I saw something that shook me more than any roar could have. I saw an ancient weariness, a profound loneliness. It had seen men before, I was sure of it, and those encounters had not ended well. It was weighing my entire species in that single moment. Finally, it blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. It turned its massive head and made a soft chuffing sound toward the boy. It was not a command. It was a release. The huge, leathery hand that rested on the boy's shoulder lifted. The creature then took a single, deliberate step back, melting into the deeper shadows of the rock overhang. It didn't leave. It was just giving us space. It was giving me a chance. I focused entirely on the boy. "It's all right," I whispered again, my voice steadier now. "I'm here to take you home. My name is Arthur." He looked from me to the shadow where the creature stood, then back to me. His lower lip trembled. He was just a child, lost and terrified, who had found the most unlikely guardian in the world. I couldn't imagine what he'd been through. "What's your name?" I asked gently. A tiny, hoarse whisper came back. "Devin." "Okay, Devin," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "We're going to walk out of here. Nice and slow. Can you do that for me?" He nodded. A small, jerky movement. He took a hesitant step away from the rock, then another. His bare foot was blue with cold. I took off my own thick ranger jacket and moved forward slowly, holding it out. I didn't try to wrap it around him yet, just offered it. He looked at it, then at me, and finally reached out with trembling fingers and took it. He clutched it to his chest like a shield. We started walking. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel those eyes on us. Every snap of a twig under my boots sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I could feel the creature's presence, a heavy weight on the air itself. It was letting us go, but it was watching. Ensuring its trust in me was not misplaced. It took us hours to get down the mountain in the dark. The boy Devin was exhausted and stumbling. I half carried him the last mile. When we finally saw the flashing lights of the sheriff's blockade at the trailhead, a wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. But it was followed by a cold dread. The questions began immediately. Deputies and volunteers swarmed us. Where had I found him? What happened? Was he hurt? And in that moment, under the harsh glare of the headlights, I made the choice that would define the rest of my life. I began the lie. "I found him wandering near Raven's Creek," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. He was disoriented, half frozen. Must have been lost for days just trying to survive. I said he was too traumatized to speak much. I said he was alone. I never mentioned the tracks, the strange sounds, or the cave. I never mentioned the amber eyes that had judged my soul. They took Devin to the hospital. His parents were called. There were stories in the paper, celebrating the lost boy who was found, hailing me as a hero. Every word of praise felt like a hot coal on my skin. Devin was too young and too scared to contradict my story. He only remembered being lost, cold, and then being safe. Maybe his mind, in its mercy, had filed the memory of his guardian away as a strange dream born of fear and fever. I retired a few years later. I never went back up to Black Ridge. I couldn't. Sometimes on nights when the wind is just right, I think I can hear a deep rumbling sound echoing from the mountains, a lonely call across the decades. So that's the truth I've carried. It's not a story of a monster. It's the story of a protector. I failed. I saved the boy, yes. But to do it, I had to erase the one who had saved him first. I had to reinforce the very fear and ignorance that keeps that creature, and maybe others like it, hidden in the lonely places of the world. The secret I kept wasn't to protect myself from ridicule. It was to protect a being that had shown more humanity than many men I've known. And the weight of that silence the weight of it has been my life's heaviest burden. And now at least it's been spoken. Just once, into the quiet of the evening.